My name is Ashley, and this is the story I never planned to tell. Not because it's too painful, but because it reminds me how deeply love can turn into something sharp and cold. I tell it as if you're sitting across from me, maybe in a small coffee shop somewhere in Boston, America, where the air smells of roasted beans and rain against the windows. My voice would be calm, maybe too calm for what I'm about to say, because even calm can hide fire. The house where it happened was small, 2 stories and painted blue. It sat on the corner of Hillview Street in a quiet neighborhood lined with maple trees that burned red in the fall. I grew up there. My childhood laughter echoed through those rooms long before my parents decided that love could be measured in dollars. It was a place full of warm memories. But that day, everything felt different. I had driven there just to pick up a few old boxes, letters, photographs, maybe some pieces of the life I had before my divorce. I thought I would step inside, talk for a few minutes, and leave. I didn't know I was walking into the end of something much larger. When I reached the door, I saw my parents standing there. My mother, Evelyn, wore her usual apron, even though she wasn't cooking anything. My father, Harold, stood beside her, arms folded, eyes hard. Before I could even say hello, my mother shouted, "What did you come to get from us after the divorce? You have nothing to do with us now, get out of here." Her voice echoed off the porch, sharp and final. For a second, I thought she was joking. I even smiled awkwardly, waiting for her to laugh and open the door wider. But she didn't. My father's face was blank, cold as a wall. They meant it. I felt my chest tighten, my fingers trembling slightly as I tried to understand what was happening. These were the same people I'd been supporting for the past 3 years, paying them $3,000 a month, covering their rent, their food, even the electricity when it was cut off last winter. They had never asked, but they had also never said thank you. I thought that was just how love worked in families, quiet without thanks. Now they looked at me like I was a stranger. My father said, "You're divorced now. You made your choices. We don't need your pity." I wanted to say it wasn't pity, it was love. But the words caught somewhere between my throat and my pride. I realized in that moment that love, when one-sided, can turn into a burden. I had been carrying them, and they didn't even notice. I didn't argue, I didn't cry. I just turned around, walked down the steps, and got into my car. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked unfamiliar, older, maybe stronger. That's when something shifted in me. As I drove away from that blue house, I decided I was done. No more payments, no more saving them from their own bitterness. I cut off every automatic transfer, every check, every bit of help. I told myself it was time to let the truth speak louder than my bank account. The first few days felt strange. My phone stayed quiet. I kept expecting my mother to call and say she was sorry that she hadn't meant it, but silence filled every hour. I threw myself into work, late nights, extra shifts, anything to keep my mind busy. My small apartment in downtown Boston became my world. I cooked for one, cleaned for one, and started saving for myself for the first time in years. Then a week later, the phone rang. It was my father. His voice was sharp, almost angry. "You paid," he said. "Why haven't you paid yet?" "The rent's due," I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because something in me broke free. "Now everything is over," I said quietly. "You people love my money, not me. Now you will not get any money. Rather, you will sleep on the streets." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear my mother crying softly in the background, but I didn't say anything else. I hung up. My hand shook afterward, but not from guilt, from release. For the first time, I wasn't buying their love. I was letting them live with what they had said. That night, I sat by the window and watched the city lights flicker like distant stars. I thought about all the times I had believed money could heal what words had broken. I remembered wiring them $1,200 once so my father could repair his old truck, and $800 another time because my mother said her heart medicine was too expensive. Every payment had been a piece of myself. Every dollar was proof that I still wanted to be loved by them. Now I wondered why I had ever tried so hard. The following days were quieter. I started to find peace in small things: morning coffee, long walks along the Charles River, the sound of rain against my window. Boston began to feel new, almost like I had been reborn there. I bought a new notebook and started writing down what I wanted my life to look like. Freedom, honesty, self-respect. No more guilt, no more being used. Sometimes I still drove past Hillview Street, slowing down near that blue house. The curtains were drawn, the paint peeling a little near the roof. I imagined them inside, maybe wondering why I hadn't come back, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Some doors once closed must stay that way. There were moments when loneliness crept in. Of course, when you grow up believing love is something you earn, it's hard to stop trying. But every time I thought of calling them, I remembered their voices at the door. The way my name sounded like a stranger's name on their tongues. That memory was enough to keep me still. I began to see how my whole life had been shaped by the need to please them. I had studied hard because they wanted it, married young because they approved, stayed in that unhappy marriage for years because they said divorce was shameful. And when it ended, I had tried to make up for it by giving them money as if money could erase failure. But love is not debt and family is not a paycheck. By the end of that month, I felt lighter. My savings grew slowly. My laughter came more easily, and the quiet of my apartment no longer scared me. I realized that cutting ties didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I started caring about myself, maybe for the first time. I don't know what happened to my parents after that week. Part of me hopes they learned something. Another part doesn't care. What I do know is that the day they shut that blue door, they freed me, even if they didn't mean to. They taught me that love without respect is just control, and kindness without boundaries becomes a cage. And so when people ask why I walked away, I tell them the truth. Because I had to save myself. Because sometimes the only way to love your family is to stop letting them destroy you. That was the day the door closed and the day my real life began. After leaving Boston, I wanted to go somewhere where the air didn't carry the echoes of my parents' voices. Seattle, America felt like the right place. I had visited once years ago and remembered how the rain washed everything clean, how the air smelled like pine and sea salt mixed together. I arrived there with 2 suitcases, $8,000 in my bank account, and a quiet promise to start over. The first apartment I rented sat near Lake Union, a modest brick building that looked older than it really was. The walls were thin, and when it rained, I could hear the drops hit the roof like soft footsteps. The rent was $1,200 a month, which felt fair, though the ceiling leaked in one corner. The first time I noticed it, I stood on a chair with a towel and laughed quietly. In Boston, I would have called someone to fix it. Here in Seattle, I climbed up and patched it myself with a $20 repair kit I bought from a hardware store. That small act, fixing something with my own hands, felt like a victory. I didn't know anyone in the city, not really, but on my second day, while carrying groceries up the narrow staircase, I met Nora. She lived 2 doors down, wore her hair short, and had a way of talking that made you feel safe, like nothing you said would sound foolish. She offered me a screwdriver when she saw me struggling to assemble a small wooden table I'd bought for $180. "You're doing that wrong," she said with a laugh. And within an hour, the table stood sturdy and perfect. Afterward, we sat on the floor eating takeout noodles from a nearby shop. She told me she had grown up in Ohio and moved here for work as an interior designer. "You'll like it here," she said. "It rains, but it's a good kind of rain. It makes you slow down." She was right. The days moved differently in Seattle. The city didn't rush like Boston did. The mornings were gray, but somehow gentle. I found a small job at a shop on Pine Street, a home decor place owned by a man named Ben. He was in his 42s, tall with a quick smile and a habit of humming old jazz songs under his breath. He didn't ask about my past, and I was grateful for that. He just said, "You look like someone who knows how to make things look nice," and offered me the job. The pay was $1,200 for my first month. Not much, but it felt honest. Every evening after closing, I would sweep the floors, arrange the displays, and feel something steady growing inside me, a rhythm of my own making. I started saving money again, this time for myself, not for anyone else. $1.50 here, $200 there. By the end of 6 months, I had put away $5,000 in savings. Watching that number grow was like watching a small tree take root. At the shop, I met all kinds of people. Claire was one of them. She lived in Portland but came up every few weeks for business. She had kind eyes and a gentle laugh that carried warmth. One afternoon, while she browsed a shelf of handmade candles, she told me about her balcony garden filled with rosemary, lavender, and mint. "It's my peace," she said. I told her I wanted peace too. though I was still figuring out what that meant. She smiled and said, "You'll find it when you stop searching so hard." Then there was Mateo, the man who worked at the bike shop across the street. He was always covered in grease, hands rough, but his grin could light up a cloudy day. He noticed me struggling with my old car one morning when the tire went flat. Without asking, he walked over, rolled up his sleeves, and taught me how to fix it. "Don't wait for someone else to do what you can do yourself," he said. That line stuck with me. It sounded like a lesson I needed to learn long ago. Seattle became home slowly, piece by piece. Nora and I would spend rainy nights drinking coffee and talking about everything from movies to memories. I learned that she missed her family too, though for different reasons. Sometimes she'd look out the window and say, "People think moving fixes everything. It doesn't, it just gives you a new place to understand yourself." I didn't say it then, but she was right again. I wasn't running away anymore. I was rebuilding. I found small joys in everyday things. I bought second-hand books from a corner shop called Maple and Ink. I walked along the docks on Sundays watching the boats sway. I even started cooking again, though half my meals were simple soups and scrambled eggs. I didn't mind. The silence that used to feel heavy in Boston now felt like peace. At night, though, memories still visited me. I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and think about my parents in that blue house. I remembered the anger in their voices, the way they had thrown me away over pride and money. My hands would tighten around the cup as I whispered to myself, "I will not be used like that again." The words became a kind of prayer, a promise I repeated until I believed it. After a year in Seattle, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: stability. I wasn't rich, but I had enough. My savings reached $15,000, and for the first time I allowed myself to dream bigger. One evening, while walking through a quiet suburb north of the city, I saw a small house for sale. White siding, green shutters, and a yard that looked wild but alive. The price tag read $210,000. I stood there for a long time imagining a maple tree in the corner, maybe a garden one day. I talked to Ben about it the next morning. "You should do it," he said. "There's something about owning a place that changes how you stand in the world." He was right. I went to the bank, signed the papers, and held the keys in my hand 3 weeks later. The house was mine. Every creak in the floor, every patch of paint that needed fixing. It wasn't fancy, but it was honest. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, and a little back porch where I could watch the rain. The first thing I did was plant a young maple tree in the yard. I named it Hope. Every morning I watered it and whispered, "Grow slow, but grow strong." That night I sat on the porch, listening to the rain tap on the roof, the new roof I had repaired myself. I thought of how far I'd come from that blue house in Boston, and the people who had mistaken my kindness for weakness. Now I had my own keys, my own roof, and a future that no one else owned. Seattle had taught me that independence wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. It was fixing your own roof, buying your own table, and standing in a home that no one could take from you. I paid my mortgage on time. I paid myself first. And for the first time in my life, that felt like love. It was a gray morning in late October when I first heard that my parents were living on the streets. The news came from my cousin Mark, who lived in Chicago. He called while I was sitting at my kitchen table in Seattle, drinking coffee and watching rain crawl down the window. "Ashley," he said, his voice uncertain. "I saw your parents last week near a shelter on South Wells Street. They didn't recognize me at first. They don't look good." For a long moment I said nothing. I stared at the small maple tree outside my house, the one I had planted in my yard months before, and watched its leaves fall one by. My chest felt hollow, not from shock, but from something heavier, quieter. I had known deep down that the day might come when my parents' pride would meet its consequence. Still, hearing it out loud made it real. Mark kept talking. "They said they were trying to find work, but your dad's too old and your mom's been sick. I gave them a few dollars for food." His voice softened. "They asked about you." I wanted to ask what they said, but I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath and told him, "Thank you for letting me know, Mark. I appreciate it." When I hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting silence fill the room. The coffee had gone cold, and my hands were trembling slightly. I wasn't sure if it was guilt or anger that made them shake. Maybe both. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying their voices from that day at the Blue House in Boston. the shouting, the rejection, the way they'd looked at me like a stranger. I remembered how I had driven away, how I'd cut off every payment, and how they had called a week later demanding rent money as if nothing had changed. I had drawn the line that day, but the pain of it still lived somewhere inside me, like a quiet bruise. 3 days later, my phone rang. The number was unknown, but something in me already knew who it was. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said. There was silence for a moment, and then a small, fragile voice whispered, "Ashley." It was my mother. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, as if it had been rubbed away by too much cold air and too many apologies. "We're sorry," she said almost too quietly to hear. "We were wrong." I didn't say anything. I just listened. I could hear my father in the background coughing. Then he came to the phone. "Ashley, it's your father." He paused. "We've made mistakes. We need help. Just a little money, maybe $50. We haven't eaten properly in days. Your mother's been sick." His words hung heavy in the air. For a moment I closed my eyes, remembering the countless times I had sent them money. The $3,000 a month, the rent, the repairs, the food, all of it. I had done those things out of love. And yet, when I needed love most, they had slammed the door in my face. Now they wanted money again. My heart tightened, turning hard and small like a clenched fist. I could have said yes. I could have sent $100 without thinking twice. But the truth was, this wasn't about money anymore. It was about value, about whether they saw me as their daughter or their bank account. I wasn't sure they knew the difference. "I can't," I said finally. My mother began to cry. "Please, Ashley, we're sorry, we love you." "We'll never ask again," I swallowed, feeling tears sting behind my eyes, but my voice stayed steady. "You loved what I gave you, not who I am. You threw me away the moment I stopped being useful." There was a sound on the line, maybe a sob, maybe the wind, my father said softly. "You're right. We did. We were proud and cruel, but we're still your parents. We made a terrible mistake." I felt my throat tighten. "You made a choice," I said. "Now you live with it." And then before they could speak again, I hung up. For hours afterward, I sat on the couch staring at nothing. My phone rang twice more that night, but I didn't answer. The next morning, I turned it off completely. I told myself it was for peace, but the truth was I didn't want to hear them beg. I wanted them to understand, really understand what they had done. Weeks passed. Seattle grew colder. The maple tree in my yard stood bare, its branches stretched toward a sky that seemed permanently gray. I worked, I saved, I lived quietly. Yet every so often, I found myself wondering where my parents were sleeping, if they'd found warmth somewhere. The thought brought no comfort, only a strange ache that refused to leave. One afternoon in December, I received a letter. It had no return address, but I recognized my father's handwriting immediately, the same looping script from the birthday cards he used to send me when I was younger. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were just a few lines. "Ashley, you were right. We lost sight of what mattered. We wanted your money because it was easier than facing our own failures. You were the best part of our lives and we hurt you. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope one day you'll think of us with less anger. We love you, Dad." I read the letter twice, maybe 3 times. My eyes blurred somewhere in the middle. I didn't cry. Not really. It wasn't the kind of sadness that tears could fix. It was quieter than that, something deep in my chest that whispered, "I wish it hadn't come to this." I folded the letter fully and tucked it into a drawer. I didn't write back. Not yet. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't something you could give just because someone asked for it. It wasn't a switch you could flip. It was a slow, painful rebuilding, and I wasn't ready. The days went on. I started volunteering once a week at a shelter downtown, serving meals to people who had nothing but stories and hope. I never told anyone about my parents, but every time I ladled soup into a bowl, I thought of them. I wondered if someone else somewhere was handing them food with the same quiet kindness. Sometimes late at night, I caught myself talking to the dark. "I don't hate you," I would whisper, "but I can't love you like I used to." Saying it out loud made it real. I learned that forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about accepting it. And that's what I did. I accepted that my parents had failed me, that I had walked away, and that we were all living with the choices we made. I didn't forgive them yet. Not then. But for the first time, I began to imagine that maybe someday I could. Years passed quietly after that letter arrived. and life settled into something calm and steady, like a lake after a long storm. I tell this part slowly because it's the part that taught me the most. Not about others, but about myself. Time has a way of sanding down the sharp edges of pain, turning anger into reflection. I learned how to use my hands for work and my head for peace. The house I bought in Seattle stood firm through every season, through wind and rain, and I fixed every broken thing with my own tools. There was pride in that, in knowing that when something cracked, I didn't have to call anyone. I could mend it myself. The years shaped me into someone I almost didn't recognize. Stronger, yes, but also softer in ways I never expected. My job at Ben's shop grew into a small management role. I learned how to talk to customers, how to run budgets, and how to trust my own decisions. Every paycheck I earned, I divided carefully. Some for bills, some for savings, and a little bit each month for something that simply made me happy. A new book, a fresh plant, or a trip to the farmer's market. It sounds simple, but that small balance was everything. When I was younger, I gave so much of myself that there was nothing left for me. Now, I am made sure to give wisely. I donated $2,500 to a shelter in Atlanta, America, the same kind my cousin once told me my parents had visited. The money went toward building new beds and offering classes for people who wanted to learn trades, cooking, sewing, fixing bicycles. I did it not because I wanted recognition, but because my anger had finally cooled enough to leave room for compassion again. Helping others no longer felt like a wound reopening. It felt like a choice I owned. That was the difference. Ownership. I own my choices now. My life, my house, my money, they were all mine. Built from my own effort, I kept a framed photo of my little maple tree in the living room, the one I planted my first year in Seattle. It had grown taller than the fence, leaves thick and bright, roots strong in the soil. Sometimes I looked at that tree and thought, we grew together, you and I. One spring I took my first trip abroad, something I had always wanted to do, but never dared when my life revolved around everyone else's needs. I bought a ticket to Europe, spending £600 on a flight that felt like a promise to my younger self. I landed in Florence, Italy, where the air smelled like bread and coffee, and every building looked like it had a secret. I stayed in a small hotel near the Arno River, and spent days walking through streets that hummed with history. I watched fountains sing at night, their waters glowing in the soft light, and I wrote in my journal about freedom, not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that sits in your chest and hums like a song. I met strangers who became stories in my memory. A painter from Berlin who sold watercolor postcards. An old woman in a cafe who told me about her late husband, and a young couple from London saving up to move to America. We shared laughter over coffee, traded pieces of our lives for the price of a conversation. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from my past. I was walking toward something new. When I came back to America, I felt lighter. My suitcase was filled with souvenirs, a few small gifts, a pressed flower, a postcard, but the real treasure was the change I felt inside me. My anger had become something smaller, quieter, and in its place grew understanding. I didn't forgive my parents entirely, not yet, but I understood them in ways I hadn't before. People can love you and still hurt you. They can need you and still reject you. Sometimes those truths exist side by side, and the only thing you can do is decide which one defines you. My parents, as far as I knew, never found stable ground again. I heard once through a distant relative that they had moved to a small shelter community outside Chicago. They were old now, tired, and finally kind to one another. When I thought of them, my chest tightened. Not with rage anymore, but with the dull ache of something lost. Sometimes I even imagined driving there, standing before them and just talking. Not to accuse, not to punish, just to speak honestly. But each time I almost decided to go, I stopped myself. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't an event. It's a horizon, always visible, but reached only when you're ready. I poured my energy into what I could build instead of what I couldn't fix. My home became a reflection of peace. White curtains that moved softly in the wind, shelves lined with books and framed photos of the places I'd seen. On weekends, Nora still came over with her dog, and we'd drink coffee on the porch, laughing about small things, leaky faucets, bad dates, the never-ending Seattle rain. She once said, "You've changed, Ashley. You used to sound like someone carrying a stone in her chest. Now it's like you let it go. Maybe I had. Maybe that stone had turned into the soil beneath my maple tree. One afternoon, while sorting through papers in my office, I came across my father's old letter again. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. The ink faded. I read it slowly, the words no longer stabbing like they once had. We lost sight of what mattered. We don't expect forgiveness, but we hope one day you'll think of us with less anger. I folded it gently and placed it back in the drawer. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I was finally ready to remember without bitterness. If you ask me now how much I lost or gained, I could tell you in simple terms, I lost a kind of innocence. The blind belief that family always means love. I lost trust in people who used it carelessly, but I gained something far greater, a home of my own, a heart that belongs only to me, and a peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. I gained mornings filled with sunlight through my kitchen window, evenings with music playing softly as I cooked dinner for one. I gained the quiet joy of buying my own cup for $12 and not having to explain why. I learned that strength isn't loud, it's not in revenge or pride, it's in the quiet decision to choose yourself, even when no one else does. It's in paying your mortgage on time, in fixing your roof, in planting a tree and watching it grow year after year. So this is my story, plain, because plain is honest. I lived in America. I worked, I gave, I drew a line, and I chose myself. And now if you ever sit with me on my porch, I'll tell you what I plan to plant next spring or who helped me fix my fence last month. I'll say it the same way I tell everything else, not with bitterness, not with regret, but with a quiet, steady pride. Because I am still Ashley, the woman who was thrown out, who walked away, who built something better, and who learned at last that her own hands were